Hi everyone, welcome to tonight's Virtual Writers Workshop. My name is Salim and I will be serving as your host tonight and will help navigate questions. Our topic tonight is Finishing Your Story, presented by local mystery author Molly MacRae. Before I introduce Molly, I do want to share a few updates about the library. We are open and back to our regular hours. However, if you don't feel comfortable coming in just yet, we did continue our curbside delivery service. This is where you can request an item at home and pick it up in front of the library during designated hours. For more information on that, you can visit champaign.org/curbside. If you have questions for staff, there are a few ways you can reach out to us. You can schedule a consultation at champaign.org/book-a-librarian. You can chat with us anytime the library is open. Our chat feature is located on the main website, champaign.org, at the bottom of the page. And finally, you can email us at librarian@champaign.org. I will be making a few announcements about the short story contest at the end of tonight's workshop, so stick around for important dates. I'd also like to share a few instructions for communicating through Zoom tonight. So depending on your device, at the bottom of the screen towards the center, you should see the option to chat. This will allow you to type your question in. Next to that is the option to raise your hand if you prefer to use your microphone, and I can unmute you. We ask that you hold all your questions for Molly until the end of her presentation, and she will address them then. With that said, I'd like to now introduce our presenter. Molly MacRae is the award-winning author of the Haunted Yarn Shop Mysteries and the Highland Bookshop Mysteries. Her short stories have appeared in Alfred Hitchcock Mystery Magazine since 1990. Her latest novel, Book 4 in the Highland Bookshop Mysteries, titled Heather and Homicide, comes out next month. Molly, thank you again for being here, and I will turn it over to you.
That's why we read and write mysteries. Here are some other kinds of endings that you'll recognize these, and you might think of using these in your stories. There's happily ever after. That's where every plot point and loose end is resolved. There's a balanced ending. For instance, time is featured in the opening once upon a time, and that's balanced at the other end by another reference to time, and they lived happily ever after. Not necessarily a realistic sort of story, but many romances go this way. Many cozy mysteries could go this way. Children's picture books might go this way. Fairy tales go this way. Then there's the ending that's more like, but wait. Most of the loose ends are resolved because generally speaking, we want to resolve the major plot issues to complete the story's arc. But there's motion in an arc. Our characters grow or they change and some kind of change occurs. They move through the story toward the resolution. So it can work to leave a few loose ends to continue that motion, to let the reader's imagination fill in the rest of the story. There's a sense of reality to that, because life usually isn't a fairy tale where we live happily ever after. A good example of a but wait ending is in The Cat in the Hat. Hang on. The Cat in the Hat. Okay. This book starts with two children, Sally and I, stuck inside on a rainy day while mother's away, wishing for something to do. The cat arrives, madness builds to a crescendo, everything wraps up nicely though, because the cat cleans up and leaves, and all is well when mother comes home and whew, but wait. Then our mother came in and she said to us two, "Did you have any fun? Tell me, what did you do?" And Sally and I did not know what to say. Should we tell her the things that went on there that day? Should we tell her about it? Now, what should we do? Well, what would you do if your mother asked you? So there you have things nicely tied up, but you've got that but wait, which gives kids a little frisson of that madness and mayhem. There are ambiguous, unresolved endings. A good example of this is The Interlopers by Saki, H. Monroe. You can find that at the library. Actually, the copies are checked out right now, but you can find it, you can download it. You can download a complete short stories of Saki through Hoopla, one of the nice services through the library. Unresolved endings leave the reader with lots of questions and loose ends, and also potentially frustration if it isn't done well. You don't want a reader to say, but nothing happened, or things happened and now we don't really know what happened. Yes, you don't want them frustrated. While there's likely to be a degree of resolution, though, the reader will probably wonder how the story is going to continue and what will happen to its protagonist. Does the unresolved ending suit the story, though? If it does, that's good. Just you have to be wary with that one, because it can frustrate people. It can make people think, well, it's not really a story. It's one of those modern things that just leaves you hanging. Traditional ghost stories are often unresolved endings, though. The ones that you tell around a campfire, they have ambiguous endings, where they leave the protagonist facing the specter and the listener or your reader unable to sleep. Where there's a story called The Taily Po, where a creature invades a man's house and his life, and it ends with the creature scratching everything to pieces, and you're left thinking, oh my God, did he kill the man? It's a terrifying story for small children. You can find that at the library too. There's a wonderful picture book version of it, which terrifies children. I terrified my children with it. Unknowingly, we had never read the book before. We found it at the library, looked delightful because of the picture of the creature on the front, and we were all traumatized. But we love the story anyway. There's the twist ending. The Unreliable Narrator is a version of that. If you've heard of The Girl on the Train, is that what it's called? Anyway, unreliable narrators are quite popular these days in mystery fiction, and that's a version of the twist, because it's an unexpected ending. But to do the twist right, you have to plant the seeds for your twist in advance. You have to weave your clues in so that when the time comes, the ultimate twist or the big reveal seems completely natural. You don't want it to be ambiguous. You don't want it to be unfair. You don't want it to be frustrating. Jane Cleland, who writes great mysteries, as well as craft articles and books about writing for Writer's Digest, offers this tip for twist endings. Place a telling clue in the middle of a list of like items. So if the item that is going to be a major clue is a gold watch, you have your character remove her gold watch, replace it with a bracelet, put a gold bauble on, fix her mascara. Actually, I put the watch at the beginning, but you bury the clue in with a list of other items, so that it seems like a list of items, not a boring list that goes on and on, but something that the reader will lose track of, and later when the twist is revealed, they can say, oh yeah, okay, should have seen that coming, but no one ever can. That's the point. You don't want anyone to. There's an awful lot that goes into writing a good twist ending, and if you're interested in that, you can find a great blog post by David Stafford at The Right Practice. And I will include that in some information that Solomon can email you tomorrow, a link to that blog post. There's the full circle ending, where you bring a story back toward the beginning to show the beginning in a new light. Ties into the story's theme. It might tie into the story's title. That's one of my favorite ways to end a short story. And I will give you an example of how that works. Hang on. This is the beginning, the opening of my story, Ah, Paradise, and then the end to show you how they come full circle. This is two sisters, Margaret, who's telling the story, and her sister Bitsy, who is somewhat annoying. Margaret owns a bookshop. Okay. I didn't call the police when my sister Bitsy disappeared. And of course now I'm never supposed to forgive myself, which is something of a dilemma because I'm usually the only one I can count on to do that. Long memories in my family, long, sticky, tenacious memories that have ways of sneaking up from behind when you're least expecting them. You've read about the amazing tensile strength of a thin strand of spider silk? A single strand of unpleasant memory in my family is something like that. But I really didn't think anything of it when Bitsy didn't call or come around for a few days. Well, actually, I did think something, and that was something like, ah, paradise. But at this point, I don't think I should go around advertising that little lapse in good taste. So the story continues. Bitsy doesn't come around. Margaret begins to wonder where she is. We eventually learn where she's been. It involves a little bit of, well, fish and fishing. So here's the end of that story. After everything has been resolved, we found out what did happen to Bitsy. And Margaret says, well, that's kind of what I figured, Bitsy. I said with real admiration. Oh, baloney. I've never done anything like that before in my life, Bitsy said. For all you knew, Rodney killed me, rolled me up in the shower curtain, and dumped me somewhere. Did that even occur to you? Well, the thought did cross my mind, I admitted, because really I'm not at my brightest first thing in the morning. This is Bitsy on the phone, by the way, to Margaret. She's waked Margaret up from a sound sleep. I knew it, Bitsy said, and you didn't even call the police. This was where I had come in, a good place for my own departure. Quietly, so as not to derail the train of her tirade, I put the phone down on the bedside table, and without a fumble, I pulled the plug from the wall. Settling back into my pillow, enjoying the renewed silence of the fresh morning, I closed my eyes. I could see hell to pay looming in my future, but for now, ah, paradise. You can tell that's an old story because there is no cell phone. It's a phone that plugs into the wall. I actually still have one of those. So that's an old story in Alfred Hitchcock where the title is Ah, Paradise. Margaret talks about Ah, Paradise at the beginning because that's really what she longs for. And then at the end, she regains it by unplugging the phone and ignoring Bitsy once again. I love that kind of ending. I probably have a wicked sense of that the way Margaret does. Another kind of ending is the wider lens. This is where your endings play out from an unexpected but logical alternate view. So you think of the dramatic shift in perception you get when you leave a tunnel and look back. When you're in the tunnel, you only see a tiny pinpoint of light ahead, but once you're out and look back, you realize the tunnel is only a narrow piece of the wider landscape, and a dark one at that. So neither perspective is wrong, from inside the tunnel towards that pinprick of light, or that wider view. But opening up that new viewpoint throws the story into a broader context, and your readers will love you for it. So now, those are some types. If you are interested in more types of short story endings, you can Google it to your heart's content. There are lots of articles out there. I got lost in quite a few of them. Beware where you get your information from. There are some more authoritative sites like Writer's Digest has good information. There are some blogs. I'll put that information in a note for Solemn to send to you also. There are some short story writers who have blogs, and they talk about craft from time to time. And they're very good, well-published short story authors. Okay, but now there's a word of caution, because sometimes you get so close to your end. You've been writing on this story for days or a month. It takes me months sometimes to write a short story. You're so close to the end, you want to race for that finish line. You want to race to get over it, get it done with. That happens with books too. But don't give in to that temptation. You might run so fast that you trip, and then the whole story will fall flat. You got to give your characters and the story the space and the pace and the ending they deserve. How do you do that? Well, we'll get to that, but how is it that you fall flat? Because if you race, you're more likely to tell than show. You need to show us the emotions in your ending. Rather than tell us, and they all lived happily ever after, you have to show us the heroine accepting the job she wanted, or delivering the evidence she knows will prove she was right all along, or fixing her own flat tire and driving off into her future. Rather than leave the reader with a few flat facts to wrap things up, use a few lines of dialogue that show your character has come around to a new perspective. An example of this kind of ending, where you don't just give flat facts or race towards it, is the short story The 3-Century Woman by Richard Peck. This is the last bit that I'm going to just sit and read to you. But this is such a great story. Richard Peck, in his short story collection, Past Perfect, Present Tense, which I will also put in a note to you that Solomon can send you. He is a master of short stories. And he includes in this book a chapter called How to Write a Short Story, and another one called 5 Helpful Hints, and they're fantastic. It's a short story course in 2 chapters. This is the beginning of this 3-century woman. Well, I guess if you live long enough, my mom said to Aunt Gloria, you get your 15 minutes of fame. Mom was on her car phone to Aunt Gloria. The minute Mom rolls out of the garage, she's on her car phone. It's state of the art, better than her car. We were heading for Whispering Oaks to see my great-grandmother Breckenridge, who's lived there since I was a little girl. They call it an elder care facility. Needless to say, I hated going. This is a 14-year-old girl. They're off to visit her great-grandmother Breckenridge, who has the distinction of living in 3 different centuries. She's that old. And they're going to this nursing home right now because a TV crew is coming to interview great-grandma Breckenridge. And this girl, Megan's mother, is worried about what's going to happen and actually wants to fend off the TV crew because she's worried about this little old lady. But great-grandma Breckenridge gives an eye-opening interview that gives her great-granddaughter a new appreciation of her. Remember, she didn't want to go. She hates going there, this girl. But she ends up with a new appreciation of her great-grandmother. Peck could have ended the story with a flat statement as mundane as that, and I ended up with a new appreciation of my great-grandmother. But he doesn't do that. This is what he does instead. After all this delightful interview, and the TV crew has left, we waited, holding our breath to hear. Oh, here, sorry. Now Mom and I stood beside her bed. I'll tell you something else, Great-Grandma said, and it's no lie. We waited, holding our breath to hear. Great-Grandma Breckenridge was pointing her little old bent finger at me. You, Megan, she said, once upon a time, I was your age. How scary is that? Then she hunched up her little pink shoulders and winked at me. I grinned. She grinned. She was just this little withered up leaf of a lady in the bed, but I felt like giving her a kiss on her little wrinkled cheek, so I did. I'll come and see you more often, I told her. Call first, she said. I might be busy. Then she dozed. So you get the that same flavor. You know that Megan's whole perspective of great-grandmother Breckenridge has changed, but Peck does not have to just say that. He uses dialogue, he uses emotion, and that's what you want to do in your story. Don't rush it. It can be brief, but you need to get all of that emotion into your story. Okay, one more tip. This is something I especially like. It's something that I do a lot. Picture your ending as the closing act of a play or the last scene in a movie. You listen to the characters, you watch them, you look at the surroundings, you might move them around, you feel their emotions, you smell and taste and hear what they're tasting and hearing and smelling, and then you describe that. You can even be one of the characters. So if you could look through the window in this room where I write, where we're sitting right now, you would see me stop from time to time and act things out. Lots of hand gestures. You should try it. It really does help. And picturing your ending, picturing any scene in your story as a scene that's happening right before you, where you can be the omnipotent director, and you can direct your characters, and you can see how it would see if something that they're doing is actually possible by trying it yourself. It makes a difference. If nothing else, it's entertaining for you while you're writing. Okay, then something I didn't warn you about that we're going to cover is some hard truths. There are types of endings that you should avoid because they've been done and overdone. So I borrowed this list from a Scottish writer called William Michael, M-E-I-K-L-E. I abbreviated it, but I'll put a link to that article in the notes that Solomon will send you. If you can make any of these endings fresh and new, go for it. But beware, people have read or seen them before on TV and in movies. And more importantly, editors have read and seen them before. William Michael is a little bit ruder about that. But he'll tell you that's just, they will be, your stories will be tossed out. He's a little ruder about that too. So the first one is, and then I woke up. Do you recognize that one? It's if you're old enough, you saw it in the TV show Dallas, and it was hokey then, and that was back in the 70s. It's the sudden abrupt, probably doesn't resolve the story's conflicts and winds up being unsatisfying. All this has happened, and then I woke up, and it didn't really happen after all. Try to avoid that unless you can make it fresh and new. Next one is, and then I died. It's an old horror story trope. Appropriately, it's been used to death. You picture the diary that ends in gibberish, a scrawl, and maybe a pool of blood, or maybe gibberish and a scrawl in blood, where the story's been going on, it's getting more and more horrible, and it just ends in, whoa! Well, that doesn't resolve anything either. Although I did read a pretty good version of it recently in an Alfred Hitchcock Mystery Magazine by Robert Lopresti. And he's a short story writer whose blog I will put a link to because he has some good craft articles. It's not strictly speaking, and then I died, but very close to it, and it works beautifully. If you see this, you see it coming, doesn't matter. Good story. The next one is, and then I found out I'd been dead all along. This is the premise of The Sixth Sense, and it wasn't new then, and it's less new now. Then there's, and they called them Adam and Eve. This is the story where there's almost complete annihilation on Earth, maybe from a pandemic, or a pair of humans is sent to colonize another planet with predictable results. Predictable is the problem. It's where you have two people left, a man and a woman, and you find out, oh, So that's where Adam and Eve came from. Then and the next day, I read in the paper that he died. This shows up in dead girlfriend or dead boyfriend songs and in ghost stories, because that's what it is. But Richard Peck has a version of that in his book. That's wonderful. You'll find it if you find the book. It's delightful. It's got a very strong girl protagonist. He's good at those. He's good at strong old lady protagonists. They're wonderful. You need to read Richard Peck. Then there's And It Was My Evil Twin All Along, or And Believe It or Not, I'm the Rightful Heir to the Kingdom. Any of these can work, just it's tough these days, but they can. There are rules, there are no hard rules. They're merely suggestions. Try to avoid coincidence though, and dumb luck to save the day in your ending. Those really don't work very well. In a really good caper story, you could probably have dumb luck and coincidence work, because you're setting it up for that to happen, and people are looking for the dumb luck and the coincidence, and it becomes a delightful ending. You don't want it to be a completely serious, realistic story, and then all of a sudden, coincidence and dumb luck show up. You have to have planted the seeds beforehand. Okay, so there are some types of endings. I'm sure you're writing all kinds of stories. So there are all kinds of endings for those stories. Pick the appropriate ending for your story. But what do you do after you've written the end? That's when you have to use finishing touches. Not just for the ending, but for the whole story, because this is how you finish your story. First, reread it. You can reread it silently to yourself. You can read it out loud in your head. You can read it out loud in a room. You can read it into a recorder. You can have someone else read it. I belong to a critique group, and sometimes we read our own stuff out loud. Sometimes we have one of the other members read it out loud. And there's an advantage to having someone else read your material out loud. If you're reading your own stuff out loud or to yourself, you might not see the missing word. You know what you meant to say, so you might gloss over those mistakes. But when you're hearing someone else cold read your story, you're hearing where they stumble. You're hearing where the wording is clunky. You're hearing the rhythm of your sentences with a fresh mouth, whether they vary in length, whether they vary in style. I really recommend rereading it a lot and having someone else read it too. It's interesting to have someone read it who doesn't read out loud well. That can actually really ruin your story. So you want to be careful about that. It can make you just go, ugh, because you know it shouldn't sound like that. But take a look at it then and make sure that you really don't have it sounding like that. You need to become a good self-editor or find someone who can help you edit. Something I keep is a list of crutch words. And every time I've done one of these workshops, I've meant to show you my list of crutch words, and I've never successfully done it. But I think I'm going to be able to do it right now. I'm going to share my screen. This is a list of words I've come up with over the years. And they don't show up. I don't have to worry about them always, but sometimes I do have to worry about them always. Some of them are just awful. Okay, so words to watch. Absolutely, actually, again, all right. And it's just, look at this list. It's triple columns, it's alphabetical, and it goes on for more than one page. And most of them are throwaway words that really should not show up more than once. Down here is ly. Just watch out for ly words. I use small way too often. I use I think way too often. Billow. Do you use billow too often? Probably not. I do. But that was because I was writing about a ghost who billows, so I needed to find new ways to describe her without always having her billow. I use thank goodness too much. Squeak. Anyway, you get the idea. You can have your own list or not. Okay, so I think we're back. You should look for cliches. You should look for was. Was is a word that you can avoid. I recently did a rewrite of the Tailypo for storytelling. And when I looked at it, when I reread it, I noticed I had was. And that's actually the way the story was, the one that I had originally heard, lots of was. So I sat down and I took out every was that I could find by making it fresher. And I think it helped the story. I would show you that, but I'm not sure I kept the copy that had all the was's in it. I did a search, used the search function on Word for was and went at it that way. Got rid of a dozen of them because it's not a very long story. It wasn't a very long story. Should you ask other people for their opinions of your story? You certainly can. In my critique group, we do that. I belong to 2 critique groups, and they're very helpful. But you should beware, because anyone can tell you how to rewrite your story. Something that happened, some of you will have heard this story before, but some of you might not have. It's always good to hear repetition, I think. I belonged to a critique group back in Jonesboro, Tennessee, before I had any short stories published. We met once a month. We sent our material to each other ahead of time so that we could read it, and then we could get together on a Saturday morning and talk about each other's work and help each other improve our work. So between sending out my story called My Trouble and meeting the next week or so, I received word from Alfred Hitchcock Mystery Magazine that they had bought the story, which was a fabulous thing. But I didn't tell my critique partners that had happened because I wanted to see what they would suggest for the story, because why not? Anyway, they made wonderful suggestions. Each one of them, there were 3 there, and then they had read it through. They had thought about it. They came up with some great suggestions, none of which I remember right now because that was in the late 80s. And then after they made all those great suggestions, I said, okay, I have to make a confession. I sent the story into Hitchcock, and I heard just this week that they bought it. And they were just like, they took those papers and they just threw them up in the air and said, oh, well, thanks a lot. But they were very happy for me. But what it taught me is that anyone can rewrite your story for you. That story was good enough. It was good enough for the editor. So when you're writing a story, yes, get other people's opinions, but trust yourself. And the only people you really need to please are yourself and whoever it is you're sending your story to. An editor, a story judge. Keep your eye on that and don't be swayed too much by an opinion here and an opinion there. There's a rule of thumb that if one person tells you to change something, take it with a grain of salt. If 10 people read your story and tell you to change the same thing, or tell you that there's something wrong with this part of it, take that into consideration. My only problem with that is that, do you really want to have 10 people reading your story? Because that slows things way down too, unless you are in a great big group with 10 people, and maybe that's fine. Critique groups are good. They can also stifle you. They can paralyze you. Don't let anyone paralyze your writing. You heard that from me. Okay. After you've reread your story, here are some questions that will give you a framework for critiquing it to see if you've accomplished what you set out to do. And you'll get a copy of these stories too, so don't worry about taking notes. We're just going to run through these. But this should help you look at your story as an editor or a judge might. And I'm going to use some terminology that you probably have heard if you've been taking the other sessions of this workshop series. If you don't know what I'm talking about, ask in the questions or email me later, and I'll let you know what it means, or look it up online. You can find out what these things mean fairly easily, but I'll be happy to try to clear it up. Your hook. Your story probably has a hook. And that's what will pull you in right away to the story, usually in the first 50 words. So, does your hook pull you in and hold your interest? Within the first 2 paragraphs of your story, certainly within the first page, we should know what's happening and why. Do we? Take a look at your story and see if that's true. You should have some idea of the theme of that story, what's going on. In a mystery, for instance, in the first couple of paragraphs that I read you of the story, Paradise, you had a hint of a mystery that Bitsy hadn't shown up, but we don't really know what the mystery or the crime is. We just know that there's a little bit of tension between the sisters and that Margaret's worried because she should have maybe called the police. And instead she thought, paradise. So you know that quickly on. That was the hook. Okay, does your theme come through? A theme is what your story looks like. I'm going to tell you what some of these things mean after all. Good for me. Theme is what your story is about beyond the conflict and the action. For instance, in my short stories in Hitchcock, they all involve Margaret and Bitsy. They only involve small crimes like theft and disappearances. There's no murder, except for a goldfish. The theme tends to be grown sibling rivalry. So can you identify your theme, and does it carry through your story? Conflict. What's at stake in the story? And how did you use tension to show that? Who wants to do what, and why can't they? Are there subplots? Are there too many subplots? Did they reach a conclusion? Do you want them to? Generally speaking, you want your major plot to be resolved, and you want your subplots to be resolved. But again, you can have a few loose ends because this makes it a little bit more realistic, or it depends on what kind of story you're writing. Cat in the Hat left a loose end. What should we do? Of course, that was kind of introduced at the end, but check your conflict and see if you have a logical conclusion to it. Okay, your characters. Take a look at your characters. Are they real people we care about? Who is the main character? Do we like them? Why or why not? How old is the main character? How do we know? Does it really matter? In the Margaret and Bitsy stories in Hitchcock, I never said how old they were. It's assumed that they're grown-ups because Margaret owns a bookshop and Bitsy's married, and they have an elderly cousin. But I never said how old they were. There's a Margaret and Bitsy book, and I did say how old they were in that. Seemed more important in a book. Also, there's more room in a book. In a short story, you've got to be so economical. Some things just don't matter. You can get, I don't have to say, Margaret is 55. Well, she wasn't anyway, so, okay. What's the main character's goal? Is it urgent and immediate? Can you identify that in your short story? What conflicts prevent your main character from attaining that goal? Are they inner or outer conflicts? Do you have some of both? You don't have to have both, but you might have some of both. At least you should be able to identify them and know whether they're inner or outer. And who are the secondary characters? Do we know much about them? Why or why not? Again, you don't have to know much about them. It could just be paintbrush strokes to give us an idea of what they're like. You don't have to describe every single person's hair, their clothing, their age, but you have to give us an idea of what they're like, and you can do that fairly simply or at more length. Dialogue. I love dialogue. Richard Peck seems to love dialogue too. So when you reread your story, pay attention to your dialogue. Is there too little or too much? Too much can be a problem. It can start reading like a play script instead of a story. I have to watch that because I do love dialogue. I end up cutting out great swaths of dialogue. But I keep track of it. I put it in a file so that I don't, as I can use it some other place sometime, or just, maybe it'll just sit there. Does your dialogue sound like real people talking? This is a problem for some people. Real people interrupt each other. They talk at cross purposes, which is good in a story because that creates tension. They use contractions. Not everybody uses contractions every time they talk, but most people do use a few at least, and many people use them all the time. So be realistic, especially if you have characters of different ages. See if you can suit the dialogue to those ages. Be careful of using your dialogue as an info dump, a stilted info dump, where you have them talk to each other, describing things that they don't need to describe because they live, they live in this place, or, oh, I see we've just gotten home to our split level ranch house. Well, no one talks like that unless you set it up to be that way. There's always an unless you do it this way. But do be careful of your dialogue so that it sounds like real people talking. Your dialogue should always move the plot forward. It shouldn't just be there for entertainment value. And that's what my problem is. Sometimes I just go, I start listening to my characters and copying down what they're saying, and it's like, they're just having fun. They're getting in my head. I need to sometimes cut them off. Look at your setting and mood. Does the story make us feel as though we're really there? And where is there? Again, in the Margaret and Bitsy stories, you never know what town they're in. You might not even, I guess you know that you're at some point that they're in Tennessee because they're not too far from Knoxville. But otherwise, you don't know where they are at all. But you do know that they're in a bookstore. And you know what kind of bookstore it is, and you know that it's a small enough town that Bitsy walks over. And you get enough of a feeling that people know where they are, and enough of a feeling that Hitchcock bought all the stories. So they were satisfied. Okay. Pace and style. How well do you use words to move the story along? That one takes some thought, and I actually didn't put any thought into what I know. I've used this before, but to describe exactly what I mean, I can't do that right now. I would lose the pace and style of this program. I would slow us way down. But your story does have a style. Is it suited to the story that you're telling? Is the pace clear through? Are you not bogging down in places? Try not to bog down. Continuity. You've seen continuity errors in TV shows and movies, I'm sure. Make sure there aren't any in your story. They do crop up sometimes. Like you might be talking about something happening in the morning and then suddenly slip and talk about the evening sun. It's that kind of thing. Or are there loose ends left unresolved that should be? Is anything needed for further explanation? Are there inconsistencies? This is where rereading it or having someone else read it helps a whole lot, because the person reading it for the first time might go, wait a second, and that happens a lot. What's missing, doesn't flow, is still puzzling. That's all in continuity, and you need to find those so that your story does smoothly go. They might go up and down with tension and conflict, but you want it to go from one end to the other without someone stopping and saying, what? Okay, the climax. Is there a highest point of tension? Even if your story is not a mystery or a horror story or an adventure story, it should have some kind of point of climax where a decision is made, a choice is made, where your main character does something realistic out of a personality trait of their own and takes them in a different direction. Is it there? You can't just have an incident that doesn't have any up and down, any conflict, any growth. Look for the climax. Put one in if you don't have one. Okay, then we're back to your ending. Is it satisfying? Will it delight Margaret Atwood by being completely unexpected and inevitable? Is your protagonist changed, wiser, enlightened? Your story doesn't have to be all of that, but it does have to be satisfying. You do want that final, yes, that is a good ending. It's the way it should be. Okay. There are 2 acronyms, and if you've taken these workshops before, you've heard these before. I will put these in a piece of paper to Solemn also. But for your story to be alive and able to drag your reader forward, every scene should have conflict, action, surprise, emotional shift, and one or more of the 5 senses. That's CASES, cases. Conflict, action, surprise, emotional shift. It could be from happy to sad. It could be more subtle than that. But that shift will move your story forward. And you should try to include one or more of the 5 senses to bring your story to a realistic emotional level that the reader can engage in. Another acronym, SUES, S-U-E-S. These are both acronyms from mystery writers. That's why they sound so legalistic. SUES is something unexpected in every scene. Give us a surprise so that we are delighted and keep reading, so that we don't put it down and say, oh yeah, been there, done that. And a scene is not a paragraph. It's and I tell you that because I often forget and think it's a paragraph. It's not. It could be several paragraphs. It could be a chapter in a book. It could be a page. You'll get those acronyms when Solemn sends them to you, when I send them to Solemn. Okay, so we are a little bit later than I thought we might be, but there is time for stories, sure. For questions, if you have them, and I'll take as many questions as you've got. And if I can answer them, I will. And if I can't, I'll try to get the answers and get them back to you, or make something up.
Thank you, Molly.
You're welcome. Thank you, Solemn. Thank you, everyone, for being here.
Okay, so you can type your question in the chat, or you can raise your hand and I will unmute you. Either one works. First comment says, thank you, this was very informative.
Thank you. I'm sorry I read so much of it off my papers, but I'm more comfortable doing that. I'm a writer, not a presenter.
We do have one hand raised. Susan, the floor is yours.
Okay. Oh, wait a minute. Unmute? Am I unmuted, I guess?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, good. I kind of have like 2 little endings. I got an ending like everything, kind of works out good, and it's called Charlie and Me: Adventures of Charlie and Me.
Hmm?
Let me bite your neck, kind of thing. So anyway, uh, Charlie kind of saves me, basically, and I'm kind of scared about dying and stuff in the beginning. That's my hook kind of thing.
Hmm.
Because I'm 76 years old, so it's like I wake up and I'm glad I'm alive and stuff. And so, anyway, I go through the cemetery, and all that stuff. Count Dracula comes up, and it's kind of a silly story. Anyway, Charlie saves me. So, we're sitting there celebrating life at McDonald's, and I'm giving Charlie a plain hamburger, and, I hug him and kiss him, and he hugs me, kisses me. So that's kind of one little ending.
Okay.
And then I have like an epilogue. I don't know if that's illegal in a short story or not, but
No.
the epilogue is okay. So okay, I'm all excited now. I can't even think. Okay, the epilogue is okay. So Charlie saved the day. He bit the big toe off of Count Dracula and turned him into a forever vampire bat. And so he saved the day, and and then a year, he's 6 years old, and a year later, I'm just saying that he saved me from being from a mortal being and turning into a vampire. And then I went ... But I do seem to see better at night now, i.e.
That's good. That's good.
So is that epilogue part a good thing?
Sure.
It's kind of like explains the story, sort of.
Yeah, if you do it right, it's that could be perfectly fine. I think even the end of The Cat in the Hat is kind of like a little epilogue. Mom comes home and everything's fine, and then all of a sudden here's this, but what did you do? Oops, a little bit of extra stuff.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think you're fine with that.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, do you have any other questions for Molly? Give him a minute to type in the chat.
Okay. I say I either did a good job, or I put them all to sleep, or I scared them all to death, or
Not possible.
I really am pleased that you all are writing short stories. I think short stories they're my favorite thing to write. They're elegant little gems. I see a question there. How do you get over writer's insecurity? Ooh. I'm not sure that you ever get over it completely. I'm sorry to say that, but just keep working, persevere. I've had 7 or 8, I think it's 8 stories in Hitchcock. I think it's either my 13th or 14th book coming out in December. And I'm working on the next one, and I am still insecure about it. John Steinbeck was insecure. Every single short story he said. Every time he sits down to write a short story, he doesn't know how to do it. Of course, I mean, he didn't know how to do it, but that's what he said. I don't know how to do it. It's just something that you have to work through. You have to push through it. It's not the same as writer's block. It's the fear of being an imposter, or like, oh, I did it once. How can I can't do it again. I can't do it again. And I don't know where that comes from or why it's there. Don't let it paralyze you. That's probably not really helpful, but don't let it paralyze you. Sit down, break your writing up into little tiny chunks if you have to. Do a little bit each day. And you know you don't ever have to show it to anyone, but you can. Be proud of yourself and feel like you've accomplished something. That's a tough one.
Thank you, Molly. Someone is asking, do you recommend having the ending in mind when you start writing a story?
I won't recommend it or not recommend it. People have different ways of writing. I often have the ending in mind. I have had the ending in mind for short stories. For novels, I usually have the ending in mind just because I write an outline, and I do that for short stories too. I'm an outliner, but not everybody does that. There are people who will write a book, they're writing along, they get all the way to the very end, and then they discover what happened because they like that way of writing. So it doesn't matter. You can do it any way you like. Same with titles. Some people, I tend to have a title first, and in fact, the title often tells me where the story's going. Or I'll come up with something like Paradise. I wrote the first several paragraphs, and when I got to the Paradise part, oh, there's the title right there. And I go from there. Some people just cannot do titles for the life of them. My books, the titles usually have something to do with a theme, or for instance, the Highland Bookshop series, well, and the Haunted Yarn Shop series too. The title definitely has something to do with the story. When you have a title like Argyles and Arsenic, well, arsenic's probably going to show up. But I came up with the title first, and then I had to figure out what the story was. So yeah, you can have your ending first and then work backwards. There's so many ways of writing, and there's no wrong way of writing. The only wrong thing is not finishing your writing. And you guys are here, so you're interested in finishing.
Thank you. So the next question says, when you plan out your story, do you always know how it will end, or do you find out along the way what will actually happen? How much should you plot and plan your story prior to really writing it?
That is such a good question, and the answer is whatever way works for you. I hope that's helpful. I'm a plotter. Many people are pantsters. They write by the seat of their pants. Either way works, or there's the hybrid way, which is really what I am, because I plot, I do an outline, but then I let my story grow organically from that, because sometimes a character or a situation will take you off in a different direction. So it becomes, I consider myself, rather than a plotter or a pantster, a plantster. It's an organic way of growing your story. No, you don't always have to have the ending of your story in sight. So don't let that paralyze you just because you don't know the ending. I don't know the ending of the book I'm working on right now. It took me a long time to figure out the beginning of the book. There's a lot of heartache in writing, a lot of headaches in writing. You just keep working at it, work through it. You can do it.
Thank you. The next question is, how often do you write?
When I'm on a deadline, which I have been for the last 10 years, every day. Don't feel bad if you don't write every day. Like this is you write when you can. I find that having a deadline helps me focus and helps me get it done. So in fact, I don't just write every day. I write when I'm at work. I write in the morning before I go to work. I write on my lunch hour at work. I come home, eat supper, and write until it's time to fall in bed, and then get up and do it all over again. But one way to help yourself towards a writing goal is not to say, I need to write for 5 hours a day or 1 hour a day or whatever. Give yourself a word count for the day. That way, say it's, if you write 100 words a day, at the end of a year, you've got a book. If you say you want to write 100 words a day, 300 words a day, 500 words a day, one day that might take you an hour. Another day it might take you all day long. But if you tell yourself you're going to write for an hour or you're going to write for 5 hours, you could sit there and get nothing done for 1 hour or 5 hours. So give yourself, I recommend giving yourself a word count goal. That has helped me. If I write 333 words a day, I get a book done in, well, it depends on how many words are in the book. But anyway, it works out very nicely. If I do 550 words a day from here until the middle of April, I'll have an 80,000 word book done. That's pretty doggone good.
Thank you, Molly. And then someone did respond from the question from earlier about insecurities, and they said, thank you so much for normalizing the writer's insecurities, because I struggle often. I also appreciate this wisdom and feedback.
You are welcome, Nicole. It's a very strange business. It's like assigning yourself homework every day for the rest of your life. And like, why would we do that? Why do we do it? I don't know, but keep doing it.
And looks like Susan, I will unmute you. I think you have your hand raised.
Okay. I have a question about dialogue.
Okay.
Okay. If you were the only person in the story and the rest of the characters are animals, so you know, I just read where you're not supposed to keep putting I said or I thought or I related or I called. I don't know. You're not supposed to put all those I said stuff on there. So I wiped them out, and then I thought, well, how am I supposed to know the difference when I'm thinking and when I'm talking?
Well, one way you could do it is, well, quotation marks. Quotation marks for the dialogue, and for the thinking, it could be italics.
Oh, the whole sentence?
Yeah, that's what my publisher does for my books, because I have the protagonist. It's not told first person, but she speaks, but she also has inner thoughts, and those inner thoughts are always done in italics so that people know that that's exactly what's going on. Because you don't want to. You want to make it easy for your reader to understand what's going on.
Okay.
Yeah, that'll work.
And the other thing is that you know, I put things in there that probably aren't in the English language, like oh my God, OMG. I don't know if that's legal.
Oh, sure. Put OMG rather than oh my God.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine.
Because that's kind of a new text thing, you know.
Yeah, but enough people get that. Some people don't, but you know what? They'll pick up on it. I see things like that sometimes, and I then I Google it. And, oh yeah, that's what that is. And other people know that. I just don't. No, that's fine.
Well, then I have Charlie Wolfen, Wolf, and so I just put quotations around that. And then I have him howling, so I got like AAAHOOOO. Oh, like things. So I put quotations around that. Is that?
Sure. You can do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just didn't know. This is my first one.
Well, and you know, it's easy for me to say, oh yeah, you can do that. If you're going to, if you end up selling this story to an editor, the editor will tell you their editorial policy, and they'll change those things if they want to. Every publisher has its own little ideas about. It's not like there's a wide variety of ways of doing things, but there's a style sheet that they use, and
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. You don't
Okay.
need to worry so much about it. Just be consistent. What you do, be consistent with it, and that will
Yeah. Yeah.
work out.
And then so then I also give him commands
Hmm.
like Charlie sit. So I'm not sure if I just put quotes around Charlie and then do ... and then do capital SIT
Oh, I see
and
what you
then
mean.
quote after the SIT or period quote, or should I just say Charlie ... and then put maybe one little mark above this on one side of the sit and one little mark on the apostrophe like on
No, it
one or
sounds
the
like it's one sentence, and it's a command. Charlie, sit. And
yes.
you could actually have it Charlie period, sit period, or you can do it Charlie ... sit. Depends on whether there's a lag between the words. If she's saying Charlie, sit with no space between them, it could be one sentence. Charlie, sit, comma, sit. That's
Okay.
yeah.
So then you'd put apostrophe,
Yeah, you could put a comma.
a comma. Okay.
Yeah. Sorry,
Okay.
I might have said apostrophe.
I did. Okay. All right. All right. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Thank you, Molly.
You're welcome.
So I think we'll have that one be the last question because I don't see any more coming into the chat.
Okie doke.
Before we end for the night, I do want to give a final reminder about the short story contest. So you still have until midnight on Friday, November 6th to submit your story. Winners should expect to be notified the following Friday, so by Friday, November 13th by 6 p.m. That's when we will notify all the winners, so a week after the deadline. November 13th is when you'll be notified. And then our award ceremony will be on November 18th at 7 p.m. So you can sign up to get the Zoom link and go to champaign.org/events.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you. I want to say a big thank you to Molly. That was wonderful.
Thank you, Salam. This is a wonderful series that you put on. I encourage you all to attend any of them that you can.
Thank you. Okay. We will end it there.
Okay.
Have a good night, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.